Somewhere beneath the pale sand of a beach on the Baltic coast, in a year with no name because the people who live there keep no calendar, a fisherman finds a stone that is not a stone. It is warm to the touch in a way that stone never is. It is light in his palm. When he rubs it against his sleeve, it begins to hum with a strange, invisible force, lifting fragments of dried grass toward it from the ground. He does not know what it is. He does not know that this golden, sun-colored substance, fossilized resin from coniferous forests that stood 40 million years before his own birth, washed from the seabed by Baltic storms, and cast onto the beach like a gift from a sea that gives almost nothing else away, will become, within a few thousand years, the object around which the longest overland trade route in the ancient world will be built. He does not know that a chain of intermediaries, tribes, merchants, and empires he cannot imagine will build fortunes moving this substance from where he stands to markets a continent away. He picks it up because it is beautiful. Everything else follows from that. The peoples who first gather amber along the Baltic coast do not mine it in any conventional sense. There is no shaft, no excavation, no extraction technology required. Amber washes ashore after storms, carried by currents from submarine deposits, and the earliest collectors simply walk the beaches after rough weather, gathering what the sea has already brought them. This changes the entire economic character of the resource from the very beginning. Unlike gold, which requires the physical labor of digging and panning, or silver, which requires shaft mining and smelting, amber requires almost no productive investment at its point of origin. The value is created almost entirely downstream, in the transport, the working, the carving, and above all in the accumulated markup of every intermediary along the route south. This is precisely why the peoples of the Baltic coast, despite controlling the only significant source of a substance that commands extraordinary prices a continent away, never become wealthy or powerful in proportion to what their resource is worth at its final destination. The value is not in the gathering. It is in everything that happens after the gathering, controlled by people the original collectors never meet and whose markets they cannot conceive of. The Amber Road is not a road in the sense that the Roman roads paved with cut stone are roads. It is a corridor, a shifting, adapting network of overland paths and river routes that connects the Baltic coast, where amber washes ashore in commercially significant quantities, nowhere else on Earth in comparable concentration to the Mediterranean world, where amber commands prices that by the height of the Roman Empire exceed the value of a healthy slave for a single carved figurine. The distance between source and market is enormous, roughly 2,000 kilometers as a direct line, considerably more by the actual paths the trade follows, crossing the territory of dozens of distinct peoples, through forests, over mountain passes, along rivers that provide the easiest available transport corridors through terrain that would otherwise make the journey impossible. What makes amber valuable is not primarily its beauty, though the beauty is real. The warm, golden translucence, the way it catches candlelight, the insects and plant fragments sometimes preserved inside a piece for tens of millions of years, offering the ancient world a window into deep time that no other material provides. What makes amber commercially extraordinary is its combination of rarity, portability, and the fact that its only significant source lies at the far edge of the known world, from the civilizations that want it most. The Baltic coast in the 2nd and 1st millennia BC is, from the perspective of Mediterranean civilization, effectively another planet, cold, forested, populated by peoples whose languages, customs, and political organization bear no resemblance to anything familiar to a Greek or Etruscan merchant. And yet the material this remote coast produces becomes so desired in the Mediterranean world that entire trading networks organize themselves around moving it south, transaction by transaction, hand by hand, across a chain of intermediaries, none of whom has ever seen the opposite end of the route they participate in. This is the structural feature of the Amber Road that makes it worth understanding not as an antiquarian curiosity, but as the first fully documented example of a phenomenon that defines the global economy in every subsequent era, including the one in which this sentence is being read. A single geographically concentrated resource, essential or desired by a distant and powerful economic center, moved across a long and vulnerable supply chain by a series of intermediary actors, each of whom captures a portion of the value created by the movement itself, and each of whom becomes, by virtue of controlling one segment of that chain, more economically and sometimes politically powerful than the raw abundance of the resource at its source would ever suggest. No single group controls the entire Amber Road. This is not an oversight of ancient commercial organization. It is the structural reality of any trade route long enough that no single power can project military or administrative authority across its full length. The amber that leaves the Baltic coast passes through the hands of Germanic tribes controlling the northern river crossings, through Celtic intermediaries who dominate the Central European segment of the route, through what is now Poland, the Czech lands, and Austria, through the trading settlements of the Eastern Alps, where the routes converge before descending into the Italian peninsula, and finally into the hands of Etruscan and later Roman merchants who control the final distribution into Mediterranean markets. Each segment of this chain is a choke point. Each choke point is an opportunity for the people who control it to extract value from the trade passing through, whether through direct taxation, through the markup they charge for onward transport, or through the simple fact that anyone wanting amber to keep moving south must negotiate with whoever currently holds the territory it must cross. This is not different, in its fundamental logic, from the way a modern semiconductor supply chain concentrates the most advanced lithography capability in a small handful of facilities in Taiwan and the Netherlands, creating choke points whose owners wield influence disproportionate to their physical size, or the way the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca function as maritime choke points through which a large fraction of the world's oil must pass, giving the states and navies that can threaten those passages a form of leverage that has nothing to do with their conventional military or economic weight, and everything to do with their position on a map relative to a resource flow that the rest of the world cannot reroute without enormous cost. The Celtic tribes controlling a river crossing in Central Europe 2,000 years ago, and the government of a small, strait-adjacent state today are solving and profiting from the same structural problem. They sit on the only practical path between a resource and the market that wants it. The specific mechanics of this ancient toll-taking are recoverable in surprising detail from the archaeological record. Excavations at trading settlements along the route through what is now Poland and the Czech lands reveal concentrations of Mediterranean luxury goods, Roman glassware, wine amphorae, bronze vessels, arriving in payment for the safe passage and onward transport that local elites provided to merchants moving amber south. These local elites are not, in most cases, producing anything of their own that the Mediterranean world particularly wants. Their wealth comes entirely from their geographic position, from the fact that any merchant wishing to move amber from the Baltic coast to the Alpine passes must cross their territory, negotiate their tolls, and rely on their protection against bandits and rival tribes. This is rent extracted from position rather than production, and it is worth noting that the graves of these Central European chieftains, excavated in the modern era, often contain more imported Mediterranean luxury goods than the graves of any Baltic amber gatherer. A material record of the fact that controlling a choke point in a supply chain has, in every era for which evidence survives, generated more wealth than controlling the resource that flows through it. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, records that he has heard of a river called the Eridanus that flows into a northern sea and from which amber comes. But he confesses that he does not believe the story and cannot verify the geography, since no Greek has traveled there and returned to confirm it. This admission is itself instructive. The civilization consuming the most valuable finished amber goods in the ancient Mediterranean world has, by the 5th century BC, no reliable first-hand knowledge of where the raw material actually originates. The amber arrives already having passed through so many intermediary hands, having been carried so far by people whose knowledge of the route extends only to the segment immediately adjacent to their own territory, that the ultimate source has become a matter of rumor and speculation, even among the merchants who profit most from selling the finished product. Every intermediary in the chain knows his own segment intimately. No one at the consuming end knows the whole picture. This information asymmetry is not a bug in the ancient trading system. It is, in a sense, the system's most durable feature, and it recurs with remarkable consistency in modern global supply chains, where a consumer holding a finished electronic device typically has no meaningful knowledge of the mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the cobalt in its battery originated, the refinery in China where it was processed, or the dozen intermediary firms whose margins are embedded invisibly in the final price. Archaeological evidence confirms the scale and antiquity of this trade with a precision that written sources from the period cannot provide. Baltic amber, chemically distinguishable from other amber sources through its characteristic succinic acid content, appears in the shaft graves of Mycenaean Greece, dating to the 16th century BC, meaning the trade network connecting the Baltic to the Aegean world is already functioning, in some form, over 1,000 years before the classical Greek civilization that Herodotus belongs to even exists. It appears in Etruscan tombs of the 7th and 6th centuries BC in quantities substantial enough to indicate not occasional exotic imports, but a sustained and organized commercial relationship. It appears in the burial goods of Central European Celtic elites, whose control of the middle segments of the route allows them to retain a portion of the trade goods passing through their territory as a form of toll paid in kind, converting their geographic position into personal and dynastic wealth displayed in the richness of their funerary practices. The Roman period represents the peak of the Amber Road's commercial significance, and the moment when a single political power achieves enough control over the southern terminus of the route to systematize what had previously been an informal, tribally mediated chain of exchanges. Pliny the Elder records that the Roman Emperor Nero, staging gladiatorial games of extraordinary extravagance, sends an equestrian officer named Julianus on an expedition specifically to procure amber directly from the Baltic source, bypassing the traditional chain of Central European intermediaries entirely. Julianus travels overland, reaches the Amber coast, and returns to Rome with such a quantity of amber that Pliny reports the largest piece displayed at Nero's games weighed 13 pounds, an enormous mass for a material more commonly worked in small carved pieces, and that the entire arena's nets, used to protect spectators from the wild animals in the games, were decorated with amber ornaments. What Julianus's expedition represents is something that recurs constantly in the history of resource-dependent economic powers. The attempt to disintermediate the supply chain, to cut out the layers of middlemen who each extract their margin, and to establish direct control over the source in order to capture more of the value for the consuming power, rather than allowing it to be dispersed among the tribes and traders who control the intervening territory. It is the same logic that drives a modern industrial economy to invest in direct mining concessions in resource-rich but politically unstable regions, rather than purchasing refined material on the open market from intermediary trading houses, or that drives a technology company to attempt vertical integration of its supply chain rather than depending on a chain of specialized suppliers, each of whom can extract a margin and each of whom represents a point of potential disruption. Nero's Rome cannot conquer and administer the Baltic coast. The distance, the terrain, and the diffuse tribal political organization of the region make direct territorial control impractical, even for an empire that has successfully absorbed Gaul, Iberia, and much of the Mediterranean basin. But it can send an expedition to establish a direct commercial relationship that bypasses several layers of the traditional intermediary chain, and the amount of amber Julianus returns with suggests the strategy works, at least as a one-time demonstration of what direct access to the source can yield compared to purchasing through the traditional chain. The Roman roads that eventually formalize sections of the Amber Road's southern segments, particularly the route running north from Aquileia at the head of the Adriatic, through the eastern Alpine passes, toward the Danube and beyond, represent the empire's attempt to convert an informal tribal trade corridor into an administered commercial and military route, one along which Roman merchants, backed by Roman legal protections and eventually Roman military presence in the border provinces, can operate with more security and predictability than the older network of tribal intermediaries ever provided. This is the ancient equivalent of a modern trade bloc's effort to formalize and secure a critical supply corridor through infrastructure investment and diplomatic or military commitment. The same impulse that drives contemporary powers to fund port development, rail corridors, and pipeline security in third-party territories whose cooperation is essential to a resource flow, the investing power depends on but does not control outright. The Amber Road's decline follows the same pattern that eventually overtakes every resource-dependent trade corridor whose value depends on a specific geopolitical and economic configuration remaining stable across centuries. As the Western Roman Empire fractures in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the administrative and military infrastructure that had made the southern segments of the Amber Route relatively secure and predictable disintegrates, along with the broader collapse of Roman authority in Central Europe. The Germanic and later Slavic peoples who fill the political vacuum left by Rome's withdrawal reorganize the trade routes of Central Europe according to entirely new political and commercial logics, and the specific corridor structure that had carried amber to Mediterranean markets for over a millennium gradually dissolves into a patchwork of regional trade relationships that no longer converge on the same southern endpoints or serve the same consuming markets. Amber does not stop being traded. Baltic amber remains a valued commodity throughout the medieval period, eventually flowing through new intermediary networks dominated by the Hanseatic League, whose merchant cities occupy many of the same geographic choke points that Celtic and Germanic intermediaries had controlled 1,000 years earlier, extracting value from the same resource flow through the same structural logic of controlling access to a source that the consuming markets cannot reach directly. What changes is not the existence of the trade, but the specific political configuration of intermediaries who control it, the consuming markets it serves, and the infrastructure through which it moves. a reminder that the underlying commercial logic of a resource trade often outlasts by centuries the specific empires, trading leagues, and political systems that organize any particular phase of its history. What the Amber Road ultimately demonstrates, examined across the 3,500 years for which archaeological and documentary evidence allows its history to be traced, is that the fundamental architecture of long-distance resource trade has changed remarkably little, despite every technological transformation that separates a Bronze Age Baltic fisherman from a 21st century mining engineer. A resource concentrated at one remote point on the Earth's surface, desired by distant and powerful consuming markets, moves through a chain of intermediaries who each extract value from their control of one segment of the route. The intermediaries who control the most critical choke points accumulate wealth and political influence disproportionate to their population or territory. The consuming powers periodically attempt to bypass the intermediary chain and establish direct access to the source, with mixed and often temporary success. And the entire system remains vulnerable to political disruption at any point along its length. Since a route dependent on the cooperation of dozens of intermediary powers has no single point of failure that guarantees resilience, and no single point of control that guarantees stability. The amber that a Baltic fisherman once picked up from the sand because it was warm and beautiful in his hand became, through the accumulated weight of 3,500 years of trade, taxation, war, diplomacy, and desire, the first complete demonstration of a commercial pattern that every subsequent civilization, including the one reading this sentence on a device built from cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, moved through supply chains no less vulnerable and no less structured by choke point geography than the amber roots of the ancient world would eventually rediscover for itself.